Hello, it's Gilbert here with K&G Woodworks. Today I'm going to be doing a dog cover kennel. I've done one similar for my dog Marley, my boxer over here. As you can see, come here boy. Now I'm going to do a dog cover kennel slash table for Koda right here. Come here Koda. This is Koda. So here's a dog cover kennel for my boxer Marley. It is multifunctional because we do have a small house and we need it to be more than one thing. So it is also a bar stool kitchen area for my daughter because she outgrew her high chair and we needed a place for her to sit and eat. As well as you can see there is storage area for grocery bags and notepads and all that stuff. And Koda's kennel, it will not be as complicated as this one, but it will be similar in style so it matches the decor. All of my projects start with just an idea, and from there I take it to paper and I do a rough sketch, which may change over time due to maybe miscalculation of measurements, or maybe I want to add a feature or two. Also, I do a rough cuts lumber list to account for things such as planer snipe or maybe some defects at the end of each board. The next step to do is to actually purchase the lumber. I purchased my rough lumber from the Home Depot. This is Douglas fir 2x4s. As you can see, I did put my rough cut dimensions onto the wood. I like to put notes on my wood so I know what goes where according to the plans. At this point, a skill saw makes short work of cutting these boards to rough length, as right now I'm not worried about any imperfections, as later on I will cut them to final spec and 4SCs with the planer and the joiner. At this point, the lumber is brought over to be inspected. I'm looking for anything like tags or glue, staples or nails, or any rocks embedded into the lumber, because I will be running it through my equipment and I would like to avoid any damage to it. Also, what I like to do is put the measurement of the board on the end of it as a note so I know what that board is and where it goes, because as I joint the faces and plane the faces of the 2x4s, the markings will disappear, but I will still have that note on the end of the 2x4. The next step to do is to prepare the lumber for joining and then for planing. I use my table for flat reference, and I consider things such as cupping, twisting, or bowing. The first two sides to be 2S by the joiner get shaded all on its face, and the two sides that are to be planed later get one simple line across its face. And this is why dust collection is so important. Not only is it to protect your respiratory health, but also it would leave a huge mess everywhere. And it would also invite termites, and that's never good. So here is a rough piece of lumber, and it's pretty rough. But you can see why I enjoy the process of 4Sing, because you can take something that's rigid and rough and run it through the equipment and it looks factory. So this face that I'm joining is not completely done being surfaced, but as soon as I turn it over, you can see the difference. How beautiful is that? After the joining process is complete and two sides are 2S, I move on to prepping for the planing process. I color in all the sides that are intended to be planed and round to the table saw for final 4Sing. When you first set up your planer, you want to set it to your thickest piece of lumber you have available. So a quick reference to do that is run a straight edge across all your lumber, and whichever one sticks out the most is your thickest piece. So the goal is to run all your lumber through and get all of them to the same thickness. And the way you gauge that is by when you run them all through and all the shade from your pencil comes off of each board, you know you're at complete unison thickness. So after the planing process is complete, I have one more side to attend to obtain complete foresting of the lumber. So I use the same technique with the straight edge here, but instead of looking for the highest piece to touch the leveler, I look for the piece that is the lowest. And with that piece, I reference and put that to my table saw, and I run it through my table saw with all the other ones to obtain the same width on each piece of lumber. So this is the last step to completing and finalizing the wood, getting it cut to spec. So I use a stop block for repeated cuts for accuracy and consistency as well. I chose to use my Craig jig and use pocket hole joinery to join all the boards together for my base. It's fast and simple and it's strong as well. Now that the wood is finalized, it's forest and it's cut to spec, I put blue tape on there with labels of what they are, like front legs, back legs, aprons, X braces. It helps me keep track of what's what and help me keep organized. So the process you see me doing right here is called stickering. What I'm doing is elevating each piece of wood off of the ground so it gets an equal amount of airflow and drying time. Otherwise, it would get cupping, twisting, and bowing, and all the foresting that I did would have been for nothing. All of the pieces were sanded with 220 grit with my random orbital sander. The joiner and planer already left a decently smooth surface, so going through any lower grits was not necessary. The technique I use is very light hand pressure, followed by a fill for smoothness with my free hand following right behind. Now it's time to assemble the sides of the kennel. Each mating joint gets covered with Titebond 3 wood glue. I assure that my joints are 90 degrees with the help of a parallel clamp and then check for square before driving in some Kreg screw fasteners. I use a Kreg clamp on the mating surfaces to keep the joints flat and even. After dropping the piece like a dummy, I made sure to clamp the working piece to the table to avoid any more damage. And there you go. I now have a basic rectangular shape to work off of. This gets repeated to create the additional side of the kennel. Now that we have our basic side shapes, it is now time to fit for the X braces inside of our side pieces. To achieve this, I use something that is thin, straight, and flat to butt up against one of the corners. In this case, I use my digital angle finder. Then I can use that sort of like a stopping block and butt up one of the 2x4s to be used for the X's against the digital angle finder. I do this process on the opposite corner as well. I'll check each corner several times until I'm comfortable and feel the 2x4 is lined up well to each corner. Then I will carefully secure a clamp at each corner so it does not move. Standing up the piece like this is not necessary, but I did it for clear demonstration purposes only, to show where I mark my lines to cut my X piece. Of course, this step gets repeated for the other X piece as well. Now that I have marked cut lines for my X braces, I can now find the exact angles to be cut with my digital angle finder. I find this technique to be more exact, faster, and takes out all the guesswork of cutting the piece. Another way to do it is by just lining up your saw blade and sneaking up to the cut line with trial and error until the angle is found. And once your cut line matches your marking angle, then you can make the final cut on that pencil line. I first attempted to cut my angles with the miter saw, but the miter saw could not accommodate for that particular angle. So I moved to the table saw and decided to use my miter gauge. First, I had to expand my fence for better control and accuracy. For this, I just used scrap plywood that I had laying around. And from the back, I screwed in some Craig screws since they have built-in like washers as well. With my digital angle finder locked to the angle I needed, I had to transfer that angle to my table saw. So to do this, what I did was on one side of my angle finder, I butted it against the blade and adjusting the miter gauge fence to complete the angle on the other side of the digital angle finder as well. And I locked that in to get the exact angle. I then transferred my lines on my X pieces on the sides for reference of clear alignment with my table saw blade. Everything is test fitted and labeled to its assigned corner: top, bottom, left top, right bottom, right top, and so on. And just like that, we have a match. I used 3/4 plywood pieces for risers to prop the side pieces up so the X braces can be placed in their assigned corners, just enough to get the braces to overlap one another to get my reference lines. Now that the X braces are fitted for the sides, overlapping lines must be marked for reference. I chose the overlapping joinery method because I think it adds strength to the piece and just looks better. Also, I just find it satisfying when everything goes together like a well-fitted puzzle. And of course, I write more notes on my pieces of wood so I stay organized. Also, where material is to be removed for the overlapping process, I shade in that area as well. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is where I reference my lines on my X brace to the lines etched into my table saw. It's a subtle, thin, etched line, but it's accurate to where the cut lines up with my table saw blade. To achieve a overlapping joint, the table saw blade must be adjusted to half the thickness of the material to be removed. So just to get a quick general reference for middle, I use my combination square and mark a line on both sides of the material. The center will fall somewhere in between those two lines. I decided to use a new method to find the proper blade height. I saw this method on Stumpy Nub's YouTube channel. The idea behind it is to remove material at the end of some scrap wood, equally on both sides. So what I'm doing is sneaking up on the cut to find center. When the material in the center has completely disappeared, the height adjustment on the table saw is set to where it needs to be. And since I'm new at this technique, I decided to test fit two scrap pieces together. So this is how I normally do it, minus the technique learned from Stumpy Nub's YouTube channel. I take material off of two scrap pieces, test fit them, and remove more material until the top and bottom surfaces are flat. But I'd say the other method is less time consuming and pretty cool. I like to carefully remove material on each ends of my lines before moving to the middle and hogging out the rest. This makes things feel more safe and assure I do not go past my cut lines, which would result in a loose, sloppy, overlapping joint. Now my favorite part, the test fit. Oh yes, satisfaction. Lines are marked for pocket holes to be drilled. Marks are also made to know where to stop routing a roundover when it is time. Some more pocket holes for the win, followed by some router rounding over before X assembly, just to make things a little easier on me. Finally, the final step for the side assembly, minus the feet, which will be added later on. Some more wood glue and screws applied for a strong hold. So I'm going to end the video right here and make a part 2. After this footage, the Kennel project had came to a halt. It has been more than a month and I have started a new career in the utility line clearance field. I have been in the mountains for some time and have not been able to do any woodwork. Time is scarce. Maybe someday my dream to be a full-time woodworker can come true. Hopefully I can get the Kennel project and the video done for part 2 as soon as possible so I can move on to another project. So until next time and next video, take care. Whoever would be out there watching this. I know there's like a million videos on farmhouse style, but if we're gonna at least reach one person and maybe I explain myself clearly enough to where they can maybe be inspired to pick up some tools and start off with, woodworking with this instructional video, that'd be great. All right, take care.